The mahogany-paneled courtroom falls silent as Marcus Thompson straightens his tie and approaches the podium. At just 23, his confident stride catches Judge Eleanor Blackwood off guard. She peers over her glasses at his meticulous notes and well-worn law books, her curiosity piqued by this young man who chose to represent himself in such a complex case. The morning light streams through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Marcus adjusts the microphone, his movements deliberate and practiced. The weight of his father's briefcase, a graduation gift from his paralegal program, rests against his leg, a constant reminder of the journey that brought him here. Your Honor, Marcus begins, his voice clear and steady. I stand before you today representing not just myself, but the principles of justice that our legal system was built upon. His words echo through the hushed courtroom, commanding attention from every corner. Judge Blackwood's eyebrow arches slightly. After 30 years on the bench, she thought she'd seen everything. Yet something about this young man's demeanor gives her pause. His case file suggests inexperience, but his presence speaks of thorough preparation and quiet confidence. Mr. Thompson, she interrupts, her tone carrying years of authority. Are you certain you wish to proceed without legal representation? The matters before us today are considerably complex. The slight emphasis on complex hangs in the air, a subtle challenge. Marcus meets her gaze steadily, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Yes, Your Honor. I've spent the past 3 months preparing for this moment. I believe the evidence and legal precedents I'm about to present will speak for themselves. The gallery behind him stirs with interest. Among the spectators, a silver-haired woman clutches her purse tightly. Marcus's grandmother, Sarah Thompson. Her eyes never leave her grandson's back, pride warring with concern on her weathered face. At the opposing counsel's table, 3 attorneys in expensive suits exchange knowing glances. James Winchester, lead counsel for Premier Financial Solutions, barely conceals his smirk as he adjusts his gold cufflinks. His firm hasn't lost a case in 5 years, and he doesn't expect this unorthodox challenge to break that streak. Marcus opens his father's briefcase, revealing meticulously organized documents, each tab color-coded and annotated. Judge Blackwood notices his hands, steady, confident, without the nervous tremor she's accustomed to seeing in pro se litigants. Your Honor, I'd like to begin by addressing the jurisdictional question under Thompson v. Harrison, 1997. Marcus pulls out a document with a blue tab, and Judge Blackwood's expression shifts subtly. That case was obscure, yet relevant, and she hadn't expected him to lead with it. The morning sun climbs higher, warming the room as Marcus methodically lays out his opening argument. His voice remains measured, his citations precise. In the gallery, a young law clerk frantically takes notes, recognizing that she's witnessing something extraordinary. Judge Blackwood finds herself leaning forward slightly, her initial skepticism giving way to genuine interest. The young man before her isn't just reciting laws. He's weaving together precedents with a natural fluidity that speaks of deep understanding rather than memorization. Winchester's smirk gradually fades as Marcus continues. The seasoned attorney begins writing rapid notes to his colleagues, his earlier confidence showing the first cracks of concern. As Marcus concludes his opening statement, a subtle shift has occurred in the courtroom's atmosphere. Judge Blackwood removes her glasses, studying him with new eyes. The young man she'd initially dismissed as another unprepared pro se litigant has just delivered one of the most compelling opening arguments she's heard in years. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, she says, her tone notably warmer than before. Please proceed with your first witness. As Marcus turns to signal his witness forward, a slight smile touches his lips. The real show, he knows, is just beginning. 2 months ago, Marcus discovered something alarming while organizing files at his paralegal job. The revelation came on a routine Tuesday evening as he sorted through case files at Anderson and Brooks law firm. The office had long emptied, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the glow of his desk lamp for company. It started with a single document, a loan agreement that seemed oddly familiar. Marcus had seen similar paperwork on his grandmother's kitchen table just weeks before. As he dug deeper, pulling file after file, a pattern emerged that made his heart race. Premier Financial Solutions appeared repeatedly, their contracts filled with carefully buried clauses and astronomical interest rates. Running his fingers through his short-cropped hair, Marcus pulled up the firm's database. One search led to another, and soon his desk disappeared under a mountain of printed documents. Each new file added another piece to a disturbing puzzle. The lending company had targeted specific neighborhoods, offering what they called special financing opportunities to residents. His grandmother's face flashed in his mind. Sarah Thompson, who had worked 40 years as a school teacher, who had saved every extra penny, who had dreamed of opening a small bookstore in retirement. She had signed one of these loans, believing it would help fund her dream. Now, at 68, she was working part-time at a local diner to make the payments. Marcus pulled out his phone, opening the calculator app. The numbers made him sick. The reasonable interest rates, hidden in the fine print, could balloon to over 40% under certain conditions that were almost guaranteed to occur. It wasn't just predatory. It was carefully orchestrated deception. His computer screen flickered as he accessed public records. More names emerged, hundreds of them. Teachers, nurses, retirees, small business owners. Good people who had trusted Premier Financial Solutions, only to find themselves trapped in an endless cycle of debt. The office cleaning lady, Mrs. Rodriguez, poked her head in around midnight. Marcus Mejijo, you should go home. Whatever it is can wait until tomorrow. But it couldn't wait. Marcus had already pulled up the state's legal database, reviewing consumer protection laws with newfound intensity. His paralegal training had taught him the basics, but this required deeper understanding. He began taking screenshots, making notes, drawing connections. Dawn broke over the city skyline as Marcus finally stepped out of the office. His tie hung loose around his neck, but his mind was sharper than ever. On his phone, he pulled up the civil court filing procedures. The cost of filing would eat most of his savings, but the alternative, watching more families fall into this trap, was unthinkable. At home, he found his grandmother already dressed for her morning shift at the diner. The sight of her worn waitress uniform strengthened his resolve. "Grandma," he said, catching her before she left, "I need to tell you something important." Sarah Thompson listened as her grandson explained what he'd discovered. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at the documents he brought home. "But Marcus," she whispered, "these are powerful people. They have real lawyers, teams of them." Marcus took her hands in his, noting how small they felt, how the skin had grown paper-thin with age. These were the hands that had raised him after his parents' accident, that had typed his school papers when their old computer broke, that had always pointed him toward doing what was right. "I know it sounds crazy," he said, squeezing her hands gently, "but I've found something they missed. All those hours studying law books, all the cases I've helped with at the firm, it's been preparing me for this. I can't sit back and watch them hurt more families." Sarah Thompson looked at her grandson, really looked at him, and saw not the little boy she'd raised, but a man standing firmly in his purpose. She straightened her uniform, lifted her chin, and nodded. "Then we fight," she said simply. Marcus's tiny studio apartment transforms into a makeshift law office each night. The flickering light of his laptop casts a blue glow across towers of legal texts borrowed from the public library. Empty coffee cups form a semicircle around his workspace, marking time like the hands of a clock. Tonight marks his 37th consecutive evening of preparation. His wall-mounted whiteboard, once used for tracking billable hours at his paralegal job, now displays an intricate web of legal precedents. Red strings connect Supreme Court decisions to state regulations, while yellow sticky notes mark potential counterarguments he needs to address. His phone buzzes. A text from his boss at Anderson and Brooks. "Big case tomorrow. Need you fresh." Marcus glances at the time, 1:43 a.m. He should sleep, but the upcoming preliminary hearing demands perfection. Instead, he reaches for his voice recorder, pressing play on his latest practice session. His recorded voice fills the small space. Your Honor, the precedent established in Wilson v. National Financial clearly shows. He winces at the slight tremor in his voice, starts the recording again. Each repetition becomes smoother, more confident. The neighbor's cat watches through the window as Marcus paces the narrow space between his bed and desk, gesturing to an imaginary judge. His tie hangs loose around his neck, but his arguments grow sharper with each pass. A legal pad balances on his knee as he scribbles notes, crossing out weak phrases and circling powerful ones. At 3 a.m., he switches to reviewing financial regulations. The technical language that once seemed impenetrable now flows naturally through his mind. He's discovered patterns in Premier Financial's contracts that even their own lawyers might have missed, subtle violations hidden beneath layers of legal jargon. His bathroom mirror serves as his audience during quick breaks. The statutory requirements clearly state. He begins watching his expression, adjusting his posture. Even his shower becomes a courtroom, his shampoo bottles a captive jury as he refines his opening statement between rinses. Dawn approaches as Marcus reviews his grandmother's loan documents for the 100th time. The paper has grown soft at the corners from handling, but the predatory terms remain sharp as ever. His eyes burn from lack of sleep, but his mind races with possibilities. He's found a connection between 3 seemingly unrelated cases that could change everything. His morning run takes him past the courthouse. The rising sun paints the stone facade in shades of promise, and Marcus times his arguments to his footsteps. 1 mile for jurisdiction, 2 for precedence, 3 for his grandmother's story. The rhythm of his running shoes on pavement helps cement the key points in his memory. Back home, he carefully irons his best suit, the one he bought secondhand for job interviews. The fabric is slightly worn at the elbows, but the fit is impeccable. He lines up his exhibits on the kitchen counter, each document protected in a clear sleeve, organized for maximum impact. His phone rings, Grandma Sarah calling before her morning shift. "Did you sleep at all, baby?" she asks, concern warming her voice. Marcus assures her he's fine, not mentioning the dark circles under his eyes or the way his hands shake slightly from too much coffee. "I made you something," she says. "Left it outside your door." He finds a brown paper bag containing her famous sweet potato pie. Brain food, she calls it. The gesture brings unexpected tears to his eyes. This isn't just about legal arguments anymore. It's about every grandmother who deserves to see her dreams realized. Marcus turns back to his preparation, the taste of pie still sweet on his tongue. His tiny apartment may lack the marble floors and mahogany panels of Premier Financial's legal offices, but it contains something their polished chambers don't: the raw determination of someone fighting for justice, not just victory. As the city fully wakes, Marcus rehearses one final time. His voice is steady now, his arguments razor-sharp. In a few hours, he'll stand before Judge Blackwood, armed with nothing but truth and preparation. The weight of his community's hopes rests on his shoulders, but for the first time, he feels ready to carry it. During the hearing, Judge Blackwood peers over her reading glasses, her expression unreadable as she studies the document before her. The courtroom holds its breath, waiting. She's developed a reputation for asking questions that can unravel even seasoned attorneys, and now her attention fixes squarely on Marcus. "Mr. Thompson," she begins, her voice carrying that particular tone that makes lawyers check their malpractice insurance. "Would you explain how the Henderson ruling of 2018 affects your interpretation of implied covenant in this case?" The question hangs in the air like a trap ready to spring. In the gallery, Marcus's grandmother clutches her purse tighter, recognizing the challenge in the judge's voice. The opposing counsel, James Winchester Diadai, leans back with a satisfied smirk, certain this will be the moment the young upstart falters. But Marcus doesn't miss a beat. "Your Honor, the Henderson ruling actually strengthens our position." He pulls a document from his father's briefcase with fluid confidence. While Henderson established that implied covenants require clear intent, it also set a 3-part test for determining when financial institutions have a heightened duty of disclosure. Judge Blackwood's eyebrows rise slightly. She hadn't expected him to be familiar with that aspect of the ruling. Winchester's smirk fades as Marcus continues. If we apply those 3 tests to Premier Financial's contracts, Marcus explains, his voice growing stronger, we find a pattern that goes beyond mere oversight. The first test requires evidence of systematic information asymmetry. He produces a chart, walking the court through a detailed analysis that makes several law clerks scramble for their notepads. The judge interrupts again, this time with an even more complex question about the intersection of state and federal banking regulations. The gallery tenses, expecting the young man to finally stumble. Instead, Marcus's eyes light up. This is the opening he's been waiting for. Your Honor, that's precisely the key point. He retrieves 3 more documents, laying them out with the precision of a master chess player. When we examine the interplay between State Regulation 47.3b and the federal guidelines, a crucial gap emerges. Winchester sits up straighter, his expensive suit suddenly feeling uncomfortably tight. He begins whispering urgently to his associates, their confident expressions replaced by growing concern. Marcus walks the court through his analysis, his voice steady and clear. He connects seemingly unrelated precedents into a cohesive argument that makes several spectators gasp in recognition. Judge Blackwood's pen freezes mid-note, her eyes widening slightly as she follows his reasoning. Furthermore, Marcus continues, building momentum, the Sullivan precedent of 2015 gives us a framework for understanding how these regulations interact with consumer protection laws. He cites specific passages from memory, weaving them into his argument with natural grace. The afternoon sun slants through the high windows, casting long shadows across the courtroom floor. But while others shift restlessly in their seats, Marcus stands energized in his element. Each question from the judge becomes an opportunity to showcase another facet of his thorough preparation. Winchester rises to object, but Marcus anticipates his argument. Counsel might reference the Martinez case, he says smoothly, but that ruling was limited to institutional lenders with federal oversight. Premier Financial structure deliberately avoids such classification, as shown in Exhibit C. Judge Blackwood removes her glasses entirely, studying Marcus with undisguised interest. In 30 years on the bench, she's seen thousands of attorneys argue before her. But this young man's command of the law, his ability to synthesize complex regulations into clear arguments, strikes her as exceptional. Your Honor, Marcus concludes this round of questioning, the precedents are clear. When we align the Henderson ruling with current banking regulations and consumer protection standards, we find not just a single violation, but a systematic pattern that demands remedy. The courtroom remains silent for a moment after he finishes. Then Judge Blackwood does something rare. She smiles, ever so slightly. Well argued, Mr. Thompson, she says. Very well argued indeed. Marcus stands before the evidence screen, his laser pointer circling a crucial paragraph in Premier Financial's standard contract. The courtroom's attention focuses entirely on his presentation. Even Winchester's usual restless paper shuffling has ceased. Your Honor, Marcus begins, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone about to reveal an ace. I'd like to direct the court's attention to Section 7.4 of the Standard Loan Agreement. He enlarges the text, highlighting specific phrases that seem innocuous at first glance. Judge Blackwood leans forward, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. The afternoon light streaming through the high windows illuminates dust motes dancing in the air, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere in the usually stark courtroom. This clause, Marcus continues, appears in every contract Premier Financial issued over the past 5 years. At first glance, it seems to offer payment flexibility to borrowers. He clicks to the next slide, revealing a timeline of seemingly unrelated banking regulations. Winchester shifts uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair. His junior associates exchange worried glances as Marcus begins connecting dots they hadn't even seen existed. But when we overlay these regulations with the contract language, Marcus explains, his hands moving with practiced precision as he illustrates his point. A pattern emerges. He reveals another document, this one showing a complex flow chart of interest rate adjustments. Judge Blackwood's eyebrows rise as she follows his logic. Her pen moves rapidly across her notepad, capturing the innovative legal theory unfolding before her. In the gallery, several law students frantically type on their laptops, recognizing they're witnessing something extraordinary. The genius, or rather, the deliberate deception, lies in how these clauses interact with state banking laws, Marcus continues. He pulls up 3 more documents, arranging them side by side on the screen. When activated in sequence, these seemingly beneficial terms create a one-way valve, trapping borrowers in an escalating cycle of debt. A murmur ripples through the courtroom. Winchester stands to object, but Marcus is prepared. Your Honor, I submit Exhibits D through F, showing exactly how this mechanism affected 20 different families, including retired school teacher Sarah Thompson. His grandmother straightens in her seat at the mention of her name, dignity evident in her bearing. Judge Blackwood waves off Winchester's objection before he can voice it. Her eyes remain fixed on the evidence screen, where Marcus is now overlaying lending patterns with demographic data. The resulting visualization tells a story that makes several spectators gasp. But the true breakthrough, Marcus says, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment, comes when we examine these practices in light of 3 specific Supreme Court decisions. He brings up a new slide, one he prepared during countless sleepless nights. Thompson v. Harrison established the framework for examining predatory lending. Wilson v. National Bank set standards for contract transparency. And the recent Sullivan decision provided guidelines for consumer protection. Marcus pauses, letting the connection sink in. When viewed together, these rulings create a clear legal standard, one that Premier Financial's practices consistently violate. The courtroom falls completely silent. Even the usual creaks and shuffles of the old building seem muted, as if the very walls are listening. Judge Blackwood removes her glasses entirely, studying Marcus with newfound respect. Mr. Thompson, she says, breaking the silence, are you suggesting that Premier Financial deliberately structured their contracts to circumvent these rulings while appearing to comply with them? Marcus nods, then produces one final document. Yes, Your Honor, and this internal memo from Premier Financial's legal department proves they were aware of exactly what they were doing. He hands copies to the clerk, watching as Winchester's face pales upon seeing the header. The memo is dated 3 years ago. Marcus continues, his voice firm but not triumphant. They knew. They knew and they continued anyway, calculating that no one would connect these specific precedents to reveal their strategy. The afternoon sun catches the edge of Judge Blackwood's gavel, sending a bright reflection across the courtroom. In that moment, everyone present realizes they're witnessing not just a legal argument, but the emergence of a brilliant legal mind who saw patterns others had missed for years. Local reporters fill the packed courtroom, their pens poised over notepads as Marcus approaches the podium. The morning headlines had spread like wildfire. Self-taught legal prodigy takes on banking giant. The usual morning quiet is replaced by an electric anticipation. Marcus adjusts his microphone, acutely aware of the extra eyes on him today. His second-hand suit feels a bit tighter. He's lost weight during these intense weeks of preparation, but his voice remains steady as he addresses the court. Your Honor, I'd like to call my next witness. His words carry clearly through the hushed chamber. The court calls Mr. Richard Hayes, former Executive Vice President of Premier Financial Solutions. A ripple of surprise runs through the gallery. Winchester and his team exchange alarmed glances. This name wasn't on the witness list they'd received. Judge Blackwood's eyebrows rise with interest as an elderly gentleman in an impeccable suit makes his way to the witness stand. Hayes takes his oath, his silver hair catching the morning light. His presence commands attention. 30 years of banking experience evident in his bearing. Marcus approaches the witness box, his steps measured and confident. Mr. Hayes, could you please explain your role at Premier Financial during the development of their special financing program. Marcus's question seems simple, but his expression suggests he's setting up something bigger. The former executive straightens in his chair. I served as Executive VP of Operations from 2015 to 2022. I oversaw the development and implementation of several lending programs, including the one in question. Winchester rises sharply. Objection, Your Honor. This witness wasn't properly. If counsel checks the amended witness list filed last Thursday, Marcus interrupts smoothly. They'll find Mr. Hayes listed under his legal name, Richard Harrison Hayes. He produces the filing with a slight smile. All proper procedures were followed. Judge Blackwood nods, impressed by the young man's attention to detail. Objection overruled. Please continue, Mr. Thompson. Marcus retrieves a document from his father's briefcase. Mr. Hayes, do you recognize this memo? He hands it to the witness, watching as the older man's eyes scan the page. Yes, Hayes replies, his voice carrying a weight of resignation. I wrote this memo in 2021, expressing concerns about the program's structure. The courtroom leans forward collectively. Winchester's face drains of color as Hayes begins explaining how he had warned the company about the legal risks of their lending practices. His testimony corroborates every point Marcus has made over the past days. Judge Blackwood studies the witness intently, her pen moving rapidly across her notepad. The law students in the back row type frantically on their laptops, recognizing the historical significance of this moment. Marcus guides Hayes through his testimony with the skill of a seasoned attorney. Each question builds upon the last, creating an irrefutable picture of corporate knowledge and deliberate oversight. The morning sun climbs higher, but no one checks the time, the usual courtroom restlessness replaced by rapt attention. And what happened after you submitted this memo? Marcus asks, setting up his final point. Hayes straightens his tie, looking directly at Winchester. I was asked to retire early. They called it a restructuring, but the message was clear. The gallery erupts in whispers. Judge Blackwood raps her gavel once, restoring order. Her gaze moves between Hayes and the premier financial legal team, sharp with understanding. Marcus returns to his table, letting the testimony sink in. His grandmother beams from her seat in the front row, tears glistening in her eyes. Behind her, a row of community members who have been affected by the lending practices sit straighter, hope replacing resignation on their faces. Winchester confers urgently with his team, papers shuffling as they scramble to prepare for cross-examination. But the damage is done. Hayes' testimony has transformed the case from a David versus Goliath story into a clear example of corporate accountability. Judge Blackwood watches it all, her earlier skepticism completely replaced by respect for the young man who orchestrated this brilliant legal strategy. The power dynamics in her courtroom have shifted irreversibly, and she finds herself looking forward to what Marcus Thompson will do next. The courtroom buzzes with anticipation as Judge Blackwood takes her seat for the final day of proceedings. Every bench is filled, with spectators lining the walls. Marcus sits at his table, his father's briefcase open beside him, containing the journey of the past 3 months within its worn leather confines. All rise, the bailiff announces, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. As everyone stands, Marcus catches his grandmother's eye. Sarah Thompson sits in the front row, wearing her Sunday best, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Judge Blackwood adjusts her robes and surveys the packed courtroom. Her gaze lingers on Marcus for a moment before she begins. In my 30 years on this bench, she starts, her voice clear and measured, I have seen thousands of cases, but few have demonstrated such thorough preparation and legal insight as what we've witnessed here. Winchester and his team shift uncomfortably in their expensive suits. Their usual confidence has evaporated, replaced by the nervous energy of those unused to defeat. The morning light streams through the high windows, casting long shadows across their faces. Mr. Thompson has presented evidence that is both compelling and comprehensive. Judge Blackwood continues. The practices of Premier Financial Solutions have been shown to be not merely aggressive, but deliberately deceptive. The testimony of Mr. Hayes, combined with the internal documentation presented, leaves no room for doubt. Marcus maintains his composure, though his heart races beneath his calm exterior. He thinks of all the nights spent studying, all the practice sessions in front of his bathroom mirror, all the runs around the courthouse where he rehearsed his arguments to the rhythm of his footsteps. Therefore, Judge Blackwood's voice takes on additional gravity. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Premier Financial Solutions is ordered to revise all existing loan agreements to comply with fair lending practices. Furthermore, they shall establish a restitution fund of $20 million to compensate affected families. A collective gasp ripples through the courtroom, followed by muffled sobs of relief from several spectators. Sarah Thompson presses a handkerchief to her eyes, her shoulders shaking with emotion. Additionally, Judge Blackwood adds, looking directly at Marcus, the court commends Mr. Thompson for his exceptional legal work. His innovative application of existing precedents has highlighted a significant gap in consumer protection that this ruling will help address. Winchester stands, his movement mechanical. Your Honor, we intend to appeal. You may certainly try, Counselor. Judge Blackwood interrupts, a hint of steel in her voice. But I suggest your clients carefully consider whether they want the appellate court examining this evidence in even greater detail. The gallery erupts in hushed conversations. Marcus remains standing, his posture straight but not rigid. The victory feels surreal, like a dream he might wake from at any moment. Court is adjourned, Judge Blackwood declares, bringing down her gavel with finality. The sharp crack echoes through the chamber, marking the end of a battle few thought he could win. As people begin to file out, Sarah Thompson makes her way to her grandson. Her eyes shine with tears of joy as she reaches up to straighten his tie, a gesture she's performed since his first job interview. Your father would be so proud, she whispers, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus helps her gather her belongings, aware of the reporters gathering outside the courtroom doors. But for now, he focuses on his grandmother's smile, on the weight lifting from her shoulders, as she realizes her dream of opening a bookstore might still come true. Judge Blackwood catches his eye as she prepares to leave the bench. She gives him a small nod, not the perfunctory acknowledgement of a judge to a lawyer, but the recognition of one legal mind to another. In that moment, Marcus realizes he's earned something beyond victory: respect. The morning sun fills the courtroom with golden light as Marcus packs his father's briefcase one last time. Each document he tucks away represents not just evidence, but a step on the path to justice. Today, David didn't just face Goliath, he showed the giant how to be better. 1 month after the historic verdict, Marcus stands at a different podium in the Harvard Law School auditorium. The acceptance letter had arrived 2 weeks ago, accompanied by a full scholarship and a personal note from the Dean of Admissions. Your recent case exemplifies the kind of innovative legal thinking we value. The auditorium buzzes with excitement as Marcus prepares to address the incoming class of first-year law students. In the front row, Judge Blackwood sits beside his grandmother, both beaming with pride. Sarah Thompson wears a new dress bought from the first profits of her newly opened bookstore, Sarah's Stories and More. When I stood in that courtroom, Marcus begins, his voice carrying the same quiet confidence that had captured attention during the trial, I wasn't just fighting one case. I was standing on the shoulders of every person who taught me that justice doesn't always require a law degree. It requires dedication, preparation, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The audience listens intently as he describes his journey from paralegal to courtroom victor. Law professors nod approvingly at his detailed explanation of how he connected seemingly unrelated precedents to build his case. First-year students scribble notes, already recognizing valuable lessons in his approach. The law isn't just about memorizing cases, Marcus continues, gesturing to emphasize his point. It's about seeing patterns, understanding human nature, and recognizing that every legal decision affects real lives. He catches his grandmother's eye, sharing a warm smile, as he remembers their late-night discussions over sweet potato pie. Judge Blackwood, who has become his mentor, straightens in her seat as Marcus describes their first courtroom encounter. Her initial skepticism, now transformed into wholehearted support, serves as a powerful reminder that excellence can overcome prejudice. "Your Honor," he says, acknowledging her presence, "taught me that true legal brilliance isn't about winning cases, it's about advancing justice. She showed me that even when you're underestimated, your work speaks louder than any preconceptions." The Dean of Harvard Law rises to join Marcus at the podium, holding a leather-bound book. "Mr. Thompson's case," she announces, "will be required reading in our civil procedure course starting this semester." His innovative legal strategy has already influenced several similar cases across the country. Marcus accepts the book with gratitude, running his fingers over the embossed cover. Inside are the complete transcripts of his case, along with analysis from leading legal scholars. His arguments are now being studied in law schools nationwide, creating ripples that will influence consumer protection law for years to come. But the real victory, Marcus tells the audience, isn't in the legal precedents. It's in the families who kept their homes. It's in the dreams that didn't die. It's in my grandmother's bookstore, where she hosts weekly reading circles for neighborhood children. Sarah Thompson dabs at her eyes with a handkerchief as several students approach her after the speech, eager to hear more about her grandson's journey. Judge Blackwood watches with satisfaction as Marcus engages with young legal minds, already showing the makings of a brilliant teacher. Later that evening, as Marcus walks through Harvard Yard with his grandmother and Judge Blackwood, fall leaves crunch beneath their feet. The judge has just offered him a clerkship for after graduation, but they all know this is just the beginning. "You know," Sarah says, adjusting his tie out of habit, "your father's briefcase needs new hinges. All those documents from the case wore it out." Marcus smiles, patting the worn leather at his side. "Maybe it's time to retire it to your bookstore display, Grandma. Put it next to the Harvard Law Review featuring the case." Judge Blackwood touches his shoulder gently. "Keep it," she advises. "Every great lawyer needs a reminder of where they started and why they fight." The setting sun paints Harvard's brick buildings in shades of gold as Marcus Thompson, future lawyer and proven legal mind, walks toward his destiny, carrying his father's briefcase and his community's hopes into a future bright with promise.